episode 243. Welcome to Data Skeptic, a podcast about data science and fake news from an algorithmic perspective. Here's your host, Kyle Polich.
Coming to you from the new Data Skeptic HQ in downtown Los Angeles. Well, downtown adjacent Los Angeles. Welcome to Data Skeptic. Today on the show, I interview Mick West, author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole: How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. A quick heads up to Data Skeptic members before we start the interview. We're sending out our holiday letter to everyone very soon. If you need to update your physical mailing address, please log in at dataskeptic.com. You can use our member portal to update your address there. Although, we are going to be turning over the website January 1st to something totally new. We're rebuilding it from scratch, so I don't know if all the features are going to make the migration. If you run into any trouble at all, just email members@dataskeptic.com. And if you want to do that right now, that's fine too, if that's the easiest thing. Members@dataskeptic.com. Include your name. Please send it from the email you used to sign up. And just include any updates to your mailing address, or if you just want to confirm, we'll take care of it there.
Well, my name is Mick West, and I'm affiliated with Debunk, which is my website.
Excellent. So Debunk has a bit of umbrella to it. I know there's a lot of other sites, and now this excellent new book that I recently completed. Can you tell me a little bit about the metaverse, if you will?
Yeah, well, Debunk really started back around 10 years ago with Contrails Science, which was my blog at the time, which was just basically focused on looking at the chemtrail conspiracy theory, which is something I got interested in way back when I was learning to fly, like over 10 years ago now, like 2006. I thought I'd just stick up a quick blog explaining how contrails work, and that would be the end of the chemtrail theory. But unfortunately, it was a bit more complicated than I thought. Out of that grew Debunk, which is a forum. And it kind of grew from Contrails Science because we really needed to have a better way of discussing things. People kept bringing things up like, 9/11 conspiracy theories and various other conspiracy theories. So I started Debunk in 2010. And from that, we get to where we are now, which is 2018, with my book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, which is really a distillation of everything I've learned over the last 10 plus years of doing this type of thing, investigating and debunking things online.
So we'll definitely get into the particulars of some of these conspiracies. For example, I don't know if all the listeners know Contrails. I'm sure we'll talk about 9/11 and some of the future of debunking. But to begin with, let's introduce the book. What is the nature of Escaping the Rabbit Hole?
Well, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, the premise is that people get sucked into a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. And it is something that all of us know someone who believes in a conspiracy theory of one sort or another, even if it's just something like fairly ordinary, like the JFK conspiracy theories. But there's an extremely common thing for people to get sucked into these conspiracy theories. And it seems like to a lot of people that once they're in there, then they're stuck. If you have a friend and you try to talk them out of a conspiracy theory, it's very, very hard to do. And it takes a very, very long time. And so the book is really about my experience talking people out of conspiracy theories. And I interview several people in the book who were former believers in conspiracy theories and now are not. And I look at their journeys out of those conspiracy theories. And I also look at a bunch of very specific things in the book, like the chemtrail conspiracy theory, even the flat earth conspiracy theory. And I look at people who were sucked into those particular rabbit holes and how they got out of them.
Very neat. Are there consistent themes, or does everyone find their own unique path out of the rabbit hole?
It does vary, but there's kind of two ways it goes. One of the ways I've seen is basically a very, very gradual emerging from the rabbit hole as they realize more and more things. Then another way is kind of a turning point that people reach when they realize that one particular thing was wrong. And they will remember this one thing when they heard that this one particular thing that they held dear was proven to be wrong. That starts them on their journey out. But for pretty much everyone, it is a long journey out, and it's really, when you're talking to people who are down the rabbit hole, you really have to keep that in mind, that it's not going to be something where you can just explain to them how to get out and they get out. It takes a long time, and this is a very consistent thing.
One of the things I liked about the book is it's sort of, would you call it an instruction manual maybe? It's there to help someone lead their friend out of the rabbit hole.
Yeah, in a way it is. I write it as if you're trying to help a friend. And I always refer to the other person as your friend, just because it's a nice, friendly way of talking about people and it doesn't create conflict. And that's one of the big problems when you're talking about conspiracy theories, is it often becomes this adversarial discussion when one side is trying to aggressively push their point of view and the other person is trying to push a different point of view, the opposing point of view. And really, you've got to try to work in a much more constructive way of discussing things if you want to get things done. If people are constantly advocating for one position or another, then it just becomes essentially a debate rather than a discussion where people are actually getting towards the truth. So this is a very important thing, is actually being constructive in the discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've name dropped a couple of conspiracies. The one I wanted to ask you about specifically is around chemtrails, as conspiracy theorists call it. For listeners who aren't familiar, what is the conspiracy theorist point of view on this topic?
Well, the conspiracy theory, the chemtrails conspiracy theory, is the theory that some of the trails, the white trails that we see behind planes in the sky, are being deliberately sprayed for some particular purpose. And the most common version of this theory is that there's a secret program of altering the climate that's going on by spraying things out of planes. And the problem with this theory is that the trails that people are pointing at look exactly like regular airplane contrails, which are condensation. Basically, they're a type of cloud that are created by the exhaust of an airplane or by the plane moving through the air in a certain way. It creates these long white clouds, and we've all seen these clouds, but people pay different amounts of attention to them. So I think what happens is when people first hear about this theory, they haven't really been paying very much attention to what's going on in the sky. And then they look up and they see these long white trails behind the planes and they think, whoa, that looks kind of weird. And then they read more about the theory and then they just basically get sucked in more and more. And they start thinking of them as chemtrails because they really weren't paying attention to the contrails in the past.
Interesting. This one has always been, I don't know if frustrating is the right word, but surprising to me because it seems so patently not true. And the details are rather simple. And even the nature of any presumed conspiracy would have to be so grand, the number of people involved to participate in this. Is there something about this conspiracy that makes it take off compared to something that we don't have the meme to discuss right now because only one blog post was ever written and no one picked it up? What makes these things take hold on a culture or a community?
Well, the chemtrails one in particular, I think, is unique in a way in that it points at something that we see very frequently in the sky, type of cloud, the contrail. And it's drawing attention to something that people haven't had their attention drawn towards before. And once they're told this explanation, because this explanation fits in with their worldview, if this person is very suspicious of the government and they think that it's the type of thing that the government would do, then that explanation fits. And usually it's an explanation is given to them by people that they trust because they're part of essentially a community of conspiracy-minded people. And so if other conspiracy-minded people who are like them tell them this explanation, they're much more likely to believe these other people than they are to believe scientists because they think the scientists are all in on the conspiracy because scientists, in their mind, work for the government. So essentially, it's like it's something that resonates with their personal beliefs and their culture. And this goes for a lot of the other conspiracy theories as well. When they think about things like 9/11, for example, they think of it as something that the government would do because they don't trust the government. So they're already predisposed towards believing these conspiracy theories. So when one of them is supplied to them with what seems like good evidence, they just go for it because it fits so well with their worldview.
It's hard to measure the degree of conspiratorialism or what's on the rise or what's on the fall, but I found several places in the book where you have found good ways of measuring and tools to use to figure out the popularity of certain ideas. Could you share some of your data or your thoughts on how we take measurements like that?
Yeah, well, one of the simplest ways of looking at whether a conspiracy theory is popular is to look at Google Trends. You can see simply what people have been searching for, and you can see how it correlates with certain events and has it actually increased or not. Some conspiracy theories, you think they are on the increase because you hear about them in the news, but they're actually perhaps not as popular as they were in the past. The flat earth conspiracy theory, one of the more outlandish conspiracy theories, has actually been in steady decline. If you look at the Google Trends, for the last 10 years or so, it's been in steady decline. And it was only very, very recently when there was a bit of media attention that came along for the flat earth theory. So the Google Trends is a very good way of looking at it. I actually also looked in a more historical way at newspaper articles that mention certain things. I looked at the actual history of the term conspiracy theory itself, which really started back around in the early 1960s. It started getting popular around the time of the JFK assassination. But if you look at the mentions of the term conspiracy theory, you can kind of correlate that with events that happened over time. Like there was a small spike in the JFK assassination. There was another spike when the Watergate conspiracy was going on. But really, the biggest spike happened when the movie Conspiracy Theory was released. You get these events which kind of overshadow things. Chemtrails is problematic because there are a couple of songs called Chemtrails that were released. I think Beck did one, and things like that. They create these false spikes in the data. So it's kind of difficult to get a clear picture, but you can look at the trends over time and you can see that there is increases. Flat Earth is the one that has increased the most.
Thanks to this week's sponsor, the Great Courses Plus. I'm always looking for ways to challenge myself and learn new things. I know you are too. And one of my favorite ways to do that is with the Great Courses Plus. In particular, I want to highlight their course, Mind-Bending Math, Riddles and Paradoxes. Now, this is a great one to watch, so pull it up on your computer, maybe a phone or tablet if you're on the go. Professor David Kung from St. Mary's College of Maryland takes you on a whirlwind ride through interesting riddles and paradoxes and other eccentricities of mathematics. There's some great illusions and physical demonstrations you don't want to miss in this course. I'm going to pick out my favorites from the lecture list. Zeno's paradox, pretty good one. Infinity is not a number, excellent. More of that stuff onto Cantor's infinity and infinity of infinities. ALF 0, ALF 1, really fun stuff. Of course, Kurt Gödel makes an appearance. How could he not? Voting paradoxes. And this one's always frustrated me, the Banach-Tarski paradox. Anyway, if you're looking to have your mind a little bit blown, or just explore some of the areas of mathematics that are too cool for school, this course takes a look at the fascinating, timeless riddles that have puzzled some of the greatest thinkers in history. There's a ton of fantastic exercises to improve focus and make you a better thinker. If you'd like to check out Mind-Bending Math, we've got a special offer for you. Data Skeptic listeners can get unlimited access to the Great Courses Plus. And best of all, you can get that for free today by signing up for a free trial. Head over to thegreatcoursesplus.com/data. Mind-bending math and tons of other great lectures are awaiting you at thegreatcoursesplus.com/data. I think I was aware of this, but it definitely cemented for me in reading the book that it's a difficult and iterative and long-term process to help somebody out of the rabbit hole. One of your, I don't know if you call it an exercises or test you took on that was very notable for me was in talking to these chemtrail conspiracists. Most of them would argue that any post-2000 measurement was some sort of just there to be part of a cover-up. So they wanted previous to 2000 research, and you look through Google Books. I guess someone accused you that maybe that was planted, and you've gone out and found physical copies. Can you talk a little bit about this exercise and going to lengths like that to help people find better information?
Yeah, well, people don't trust the internet. They don't trust what they see as being the official story on things. So if you show them something like Wikipedia, they just laugh because they think Wikipedia is kind of controlled website. So what I did was I tried to find much older sources. And first of all, I was just looking on Google Books online, and I found these old books that described how contrails worked. And people didn't trust that, so I found the actual books themselves. And basically, I've been collecting books on the weather. And I have quite a collection now. I have about maybe 30 books dating all the way back to the 1800s. Obviously, there were no contrails in the 1800s, but there were descriptions of clouds and how clouds act. One thing that the chemtrail people think is that the weather is being controlled. And if you see like ripples in the sky, as a type of cloud called a mackerel sky, where you get all these nice ripples in the sky, and they think that is some kind of electromagnetic wave in the sky, when really it's just it's actual physical wave. And if you show them these photographs from the late 1800s of the exact same sky as they are thinking is being suspicious, then it can be very compelling. There are a few people who will say, oh, well, Tesla had scalar waves back then, and he was manipulating the weather. So you can't always get everybody. But I think for 95% of the people who are just kind of superficially interested in a theory like this, these old books can be very compelling. And it's not just like weather books. I actually found things like tests of snow and water for their chemical components back in the 1950s, which obviously well before people talking about the chemtrail theory. And people now have been testing their soil and water, and they find aluminum in it. They don't realize that the soil is actually 8% aluminum anyway. And showing them these really old books is kind of a neutral way of getting information to them.
For certain conspiracies, let's say something like JFK, and I'm not a JFK conspiracy theorist, but it's plausible that people could conspire to kill a president. This doesn't sound outlandish to me. But something like flat Earth, I look at it and I struggle to associate or to sympathize, I guess, with the point of view of someone who professes to believe in the flat Earth. It almost seems like there might be mental illness involved in some capacity. What are your thoughts on the topic of mental illness and conspiracy theory in general?
Well, I think it's definitely there. However, it's difficult to say whether people in the conspiracy culture are more mentally ill than people who are not in the conspiracy culture. The vast majority of people that I talk to who believe in one conspiracy theory or another do not appear to be mentally ill. So I just generally assume that they are no more mentally ill than the average person. Now, of course, you're going to meet people who are actually mentally ill and they do have very, very strange ideas. If I do meet people who I think have some degree of mental illness, I don't really feel like I'm qualified to deal with that. So I just tend to avoid talking to them. So most of the people that I talk to are just normal people who have got sucked down this rabbit hole. Now, with flat Earth, obviously flat Earth is a bit more extreme. But even there, I think the people who have the more extreme flat Earth beliefs, they don't tend to be mentally ill. They just have very, very strong, essentially religious beliefs. And you're kind of treading on dangerous ground here when you're talking about religion and mental illness and conspiracy theories. But really, they just seem to be people who have a view of the world which is very based on their interpretation of the Bible. And you have plenty of people who have very strong religious beliefs who you don't consider to be mentally ill. But when they take it to the next level and saying the world is flat, is that a manifestation of something beyond strong religious beliefs? Yeah, possibly, but tend to try to treat people as if they're just regular, ordinary people, like up the normal range of people you see in normal society who just happen to believe in a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, normal, I think, is a wonderful adjective to describe them. I don't spend as much time on the front lines of conspiracy as I think you do, but I try and get out there sometimes and hear what people are saying. And yeah, I found there are always normal people who, aside from having a quirk, they probably have jobs and lives like the rest of us, but yet somehow they've fallen down this rabbit hole. There are a couple exceptions. I was wondering if I could get your opinion on this group. I think it's called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. They're mentioned in the book, and I guess many of the people in that group do have some form of accreditation. What are your thoughts on that group and their positions?
Well, I think, again, that's just a bunch of mostly just perfectly ordinary people. They are essentially the very small fraction of architects and engineers who happen to believe in this conspiracy theory. You know, if you do a survey of the general population and you ask them pretty much any question, like, is the Queen a reptile? Are we being communicated with by aliens from another galaxy? Or were the World Trade Centers brought down by controlled demolition? You're always going to get a percentage of people. And even if you go into scientific fields, there's a percentage of people who think that global warming is a hoax, and there's even a percentage of people who work in universities, in science departments, who think that global warming is a hoax. So you're always going to get a small percentage of people. So these architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, they're basically just that cross-section, that very small percentage of people who believe in this particular theory, all gathered together in one place. So it looks like there's a lot of them. Mm-hmm. It seems like you have 1,000 architects and engineers. Now, if you look at them in great depth, in detail, they're generally not structural engineers. They're not people who actually do the equations for building these buildings. And invariably, they're not structural engineers who work with tall buildings. I don't think there's any one of them there who's actually built anything that's over 10 stories tall. So a collection of people who have kind of adjacent knowledge, who have just been sucked into the conspiracy theory. And if you listen to what they say, what their explanations are, they're not really bringing their own interpretations, their own expertise. They're just regurgitating the same talking points. They say the building fell at free fall speed, which is breaking the laws of physics, or thermite residue found in the dust. They're just repeating the same things that they've heard because they've been sucked down the rabbit hole by some compelling video. So I don't really give them much credence in terms of their expertise. They're just ordinary people again.
You have a great quote in the book from Richard Feynman, hero of mine, and this obviously predates the Insane Clown Posse song, but he was asked, how do magnets work? And his response was essentially, I can't explain that to you. You don't know Maxwell's equations, you don't know calculus, you need the tools to have the full explanation. Do you think we're going to see more conspiracies or conspiracyism becoming more prevalent as the world becomes more complicated?
Yeah, well, the world is already complicated. So the things that you see now, like the 9/11, people try to put their simple understanding on what is essentially a very complicated thing. They look at the building collapsing and they see the top of the building fall down essentially through the bottom part of the building. And they say this breaks the laws of physics because action and reaction should be opposite. The building should have been able to hold itself up and it didn't. So something's wrong. And then when you try to explain to them things like Newton's laws of motion don't actually apply to rigid or articulated or deformable bodies. Newton's laws of motion are kind of idealized things that apply to point masses. So they work very well on a large scale for planets or for things like billiard balls, but they don't work for things that actually bend or deform or break. And it's very difficult to get that type of thing across. Most people don't understand complicated science. They don't even understand simple science. People have a hard time understanding things like what a molecule is as opposed to an atom. People have a hard time understanding that aluminum oxide and aluminum are not the same thing. They think of carbon emissions as being emissions of carbon, and they don't realize that it's emissions of carbon dioxide. So there are these very simple things, if you know a bit of science, which are actually very, very complicated and almost impossible for people to grasp if they don't know a lot of science. I don't know if it's going to get more complicated because I think you already have this base level of understanding that people have that is already not enough to really get to grasp with the world. And I think what's happening is people are distrusting experts less. And in the past, people would accept science. They'd accept what the evening news told them about things. And now they're distrusting these things. And because they're incapable of understanding them, and there's nothing wrong with that, most people are, then you're going to get these alternative explanations will take root more easily because people are rejecting the mainstream explanations.
What has been the impact of fake news on the spread of conspiracies?
Well, conspiracy theories have always essentially been fake news, but I think what's happening is people, like I said, don't trust the mainstream media anymore. And that means that they don't trust mainstream science and they don't trust essentially like the received wisdom of how things actually work. Because there's so much disinformation on the internet and people are being programmed essentially to think of everything they read as being potential disinformation, people have no real means of discerning what is true anymore. If they start out disbelieving things like, for example, Wikipedia, even though Wikipedia is generally a very good source of knowledge because it's very well referenced, once they discard that as a source, they don't really have anything. So it makes it very, very easy for things to take root in their mind. And so fake news has both the effect of spreading disinformation and just creating an environment in which information can spread, disinformation can spread a lot easier because there's no real standard of truth anymore.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what gives a conspiracy momentum and maybe how often or how long it takes to die out. There's a lot of historic things like spontaneous human combustion we don't hear too much about anymore, and facilitated communication. Even though it's around and there's some blips here and there, it doesn't have the prevalence of 9/11 conspiracy theory. And even I imagine JFK has probably had its high points and its low points. What are the trends and cycles of conspiracy-minded cultures and groups?
Well, a lot of it comes from actually the media attention that these theories get. If you look at a theory like the flat earth conspiracy theory, that probably wouldn't be anywhere near what it is right now if you didn't have all these people writing stories about how popular the flat earth conspiracy theory is. People see these stories in the media and it gives it essentially all this free publicity, and then it starts feeding upon itself. Because it's such an incredible and amazing and unusual theory, it's so interesting. People start, looking into it, and a percentage of those people will get convinced by the compelling videos that are out there. You can look at something like JFK, that has its little peaks when there's things like the anniversary of the shootings or the anniversary of something happens, like some documents are released. So you get these blips. Or, there's a documentary release, or there's a film made like the Oliver Stone's JFK film, which I think was back in the 90s. Or that gives a boost to these theories. The organic growth doesn't really seem to be that much in ways of organic growth without these external drivers. So it's really very much kind of like a popularity contest in a way. Chemtrails, it keeps getting these little boosts because people keep doing these little stories on them. There was a lot of kind of local news stories on the chemtrail conspiracy theory back in the early 2000s. And that was a lot of what I was responding to back then was local news would do a story about someone who believed in the chemtrail theory. And then they would basically like let them speak their piece on TV. So that gave it a boost. So it's very kind of driven by the media, which is kind of, maybe not what you would think. That there is this underlying aspect of it, which is all these YouTube videos, which are these very compelling videos that you see on YouTube. If you simply watch this one video that explains the theory, you'll get convinced by it if you know nothing else. But really, the growth of them, I think, is actually quite often driven by the actual mainstream media picking up on the theory and essentially trying to debunk it, but really they end up spreading it.
And to what degree would you say algorithms like the one that drives YouTube's recommendation program how much are they to blame for the growth of conspiracy theories?
I think that's definitely a factor now. Like I was saying, compelling videos, what sucks people into the rabbit hole. If someone sees a single compelling video, that might work for them. And that's kind of what happened in the past. Someone would see a DVD or something and they would get convinced. But now, the instant you finish watching one compelling video, it's going to show you another compelling video that's along the same lines. And if you watch that one, it will recognize the fact that you've watched all the way through this particular video, and it's going to think that this is what you like, and it's going to start showing you more videos along the same lines. And it's not going to show you videos that are giving you the opposite point of view because it thinks you don't want to watch those videos. You want to watch videos that give you the point of view that chemtrails are real or that 9/11 was an inside job or whatever. So it's only going to give you videos that support your point of view. So it essentially, you get it's almost like a giant gravitational force sucking you towards this particular conclusion. And the more you watch, the more it focuses on that type of video because it thinks, hey, he watched this video, even though I put some ads in it. So I'll show him another one so I can show him some more ads. And you've got this blind algorithm, which is essentially trying to brainwash you and convert you to a believer. And it works.
For someone with a very free market point of view, they would say, well, that's perfectly fine. If someone wants to make an alternative algorithm and theirs is more profitable or people like it more, then so be it. What are your thoughts on the responsibility that platforms and these algorithmic creators should have in the subject?
Well, you've got to kind of look at what is their market share. YouTube is it's over 90% of the online video. I think when you have something that is almost a de facto monopoly, I think you have a responsibility. Facebook is by far the biggest online social media platform. Twitter, I think, is a close second, and YouTube is right up there. So those three outlets are giants. And in a way, monopolies, even though there are other platforms, but they're nowhere near the popularity. So I think they definitely have a responsibility. And YouTube is doing a little bit now. They've started to put a link underneath some of the conspiracy videos. If you go to a chemtrail video now, you will see a link to the Encyclopedia Britannica article on contrails, which is actually quite a good little article. It explains what a contrail is and how it can persist and how it can spread and how it can vary. And that's a good step. Unfortunately, people tend to see things like that as being some kind of propaganda. Like they think of YouTube as trying to brainwash them into believing in contrails rather than chemtrails. When really YouTube is having a very small attempt at providing some balance. And another problem is we don't have the opposing videos. We don't have lots of in-depth, compelling videos explaining how contrails are not chemtrails. You've got these hours-long videos talking about the chemtrail conspiracy theory, and there's very, very few videos that are the opposite. And you got to think, why would that be? It's difficult to find people who take these things seriously.
Mm-hmm. And passionately disbelieve.
Yeah. People ask, why aren't there lots of scientists disproving 9/11? And the answer is that they think it's just too ridiculous to bother with. I participated in a paper study called Quantifying Expert Consensus on the Existence of a Large-Scale Secret Atmospheric Spraying Program, or something along those lines. And we surveyed a whole bunch of atmospheric scientists on basically the existence of the chemtrail conspiracy theory. And we got a lot of pushback from people because they didn't think it was serious. They thought it was just a ridiculous thing. And a lot of people didn't even participate because they thought it wasn't even worth bothering with. So you get this illusion that there's all this information about chemtrails and very little opposing it. And it's really because mainstream science just thinks it's a ridiculous theory. Like they think that the flat earth theory is ridiculous. They think that the 9/11 controlled demolition theories are ridiculous. And so they don't even bother with them. And the actual conspiracy theorists take that as being evidence that their side is correct because no one's speaking against it.
So even though we haven't gotten into it, I know you have an impressive engineering background. If you found yourself at the helm of a company like Facebook or Twitter or whatever the case may be, what sorts of changes might you seek to implement to improve the situation?
Well, I think artificial intelligence is going to be a huge component on both sides of the equation going forward. I think there's a very good potential role for artificial intelligence in providing essentially the other point of view. I think we're at a stage now where artificial intelligence can recognize when people are sharing disinformation, and they should be able to supply the correct information. It's a difficult thing to do because you're going to say who gets to decide what is true and what is not true. But I think for things that have been disproven many, many times, like, for example, if someone says contrails cannot persist, this is something that's absolutely 100% false. And that if people are sharing that information online, then I think there is a role for artificial intelligence algorithms to detect that that is being done and to supply those people with the truth. But like I say, it is very, very difficult to know where you're going to draw the line with things like that. If you have something that was more political, say someone was saying Democrats are encouraging illegal aliens to register to vote, and this was determined by PolitiFact or whoever to be not true. Facebook was to promote that point of view. I think you would get a lot of pushback from conservatives saying that it's Democratic propaganda. So it's going to be very difficult determining where to draw the line. But if I was doing things on Facebook, I would definitely look into algorithms that would detect when people are sharing known disinformation and put up a correction for it.
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion. So if compelling videos are really what suck a lot of people in, I'm going to refer people to Escaping the Rabbit Hole, your book, on the long form of the answer. But what are some of the high-level bullet points for how they escape?
People go down the rabbit hole basically because they have what's referred to as a crippled epistemology, which might be a term you're familiar with. For most people, it means their base of knowledge, what they know and what they think they know, and their belief system has gaps in it. And what I try to do is fill in those gaps, tell them things that they are missing. Like if people think that contrails can't persist, I'll show them all these books that show that contrails can persist, and that gives them some information that they were missing before. And really that's the core technique, is to supply people with missing information. Now, to do that, you need to have effective communication, which means you need to be able to talk to this person and you need to have them listen to you. And the way you do that is by first listening to them, which does two things. It lets them trust you because you're listening to them and you're kind of taking them seriously, even though you believe what they're saying, but you're listening to what they have to say. And it also lets you understand exactly why do they believe what they believe and what is the information that they are missing. I think far too often people who are skeptics and debunkers will just wade straight in and say, that's nonsense. Contrails are not chemtrails, or, it's obvious the buildings just fell down due to gravity or whatever. And they won't listen to the nuances of the position of the person that they're talking to, and what their position is. And often people have quite specific misunderstandings that underlie their beliefs. And you need to kind of drill down to what those actually are and listen to the person and establish effective communication with them, and then eventually fill in what those misunderstandings are.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely seems to be a process, and I appreciate the outline and recommendations in your book. We've glossed over the more personal sides of some of the specific cases you go into in the early chapters. So I'll point people to metabunk.org to learn more about you, and Amazon or your favorite retailer to check out Escaping the Rabbit Hole. Mick, any final thoughts?
Well, I think people just need to recognize that it's a very long process. And this is really the key thing that I think people miss when they start trying to help someone who believes in some conspiracy theory. You have to give them time and don't give up, because people do escape from the rabbit hole. And I have multiple examples of people having done so. Sometimes it takes a few weeks, sometimes it takes months, sometimes it can take years. So it might seem like you're getting nowhere, but people do escape from the rabbit hole.
Patience it is then. Well, Mick, thanks again for coming on the show and sharing both your research and your efforts. I don't know if you call it activism, but I think you could label it that. I really enjoyed the book, and I hope people check it out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Data Skeptic, where the news may be fake, but the data doesn't lie. Show your support by getting a t-shirt at dataskeptic.com.